Well, welcome everyone, and I want to say a hello to my friends in Union City who are joining us by video this week. I'm looking forward very much to an extended time with you next Sunday morning. I also want to thank everyone in our congregation for the generous contributions to our Election Day Refreshment Fund last week. You contributed over $1,500 to that fund, which allowed us to serve over 2,000 people on Election Day. Thank you very much. It was so encouraging as I was standing in line to vote to see a steady stream of people exiting our Edinburgh building with coffee and donuts in hand. It's a small thing, but it really, really does change the atmosphere. So thank you for your commitment to do the things that are important. Now, a couple more things to mention before we come to today's topic. First, a final word about the election and politics. As we predicted last week, today roughly half our congregation is elated and half our congregation is despairing based on Tuesday's election results. We knew this would be the case regardless of who won because we are a politically diverse church, which by the way is wonderful. No matter who you were pulling for, hoping for, working for to win last week, it's now that the real work begins. Now's the time for us all to work together for the unity that Jesus so passionately prayed for in John's Gospel. That unity begins with graciousness. So if your side won, don't gloat. And if your side lost, don't fume. Root yourself instead in the hope that is ours in Jesus Christ, whether you're celebrating or despairing. And be thoughtful about how what you say and do can either unite or divide us. While we're hopeful that our political leaders on both sides will demonstrate this kind of graciousness, the bottom line is that it really all begins with us. At work, at school, on Facebook, let's together work for the common good as we are the good. You'll remember Paul in his letter to Titus so passionately encouraged us to be this way. Well, enough about all that. I also want to share with you briefly about our plans for Sunday, December 1st, the first Sunday of Advent that we've been asking you to keep set aside on your calendars. That day is going to be an amazing day in McLean Church. On that Sunday morning, we're going to ordain two of our pastors, Pastor Lenora Rum from our Union City congregation and Pastor Mike Priestap from our Edinburgh congregation. Ordination is the formal act by which the church bestows the lifelong title and commission of minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ on an individual. It's one of the most sacred acts and services the church conducts. That Sunday morning, we'll be combining all of our weekend services in both Edinburgh and Union City into one giant service of worship at 10 a.m. at our Edinburgh location. Transportation arrangements will be made for members of our Union City congregation so that everyone has an opportunity to be a part of this important service. Now, if you're regularly part of our online congregation, and you're able to attend in person that Sunday morning, you're certainly going to want to do so. But if you could only attend online, some special features of that weekend's online service will help you engage and connect with what we're doing in Edinburgh on that day. Now, I'll continue to say more about all of this in the coming weeks, but for now, please mark Sunday, December 1st at 10 a.m. on your calendars for this special service. If it's at all possible, you very much want to be part of this celebration. So now, on to an image of salvation that will change the way you view everything. We're talking about the story of the exile. In recent years, the story of the exile has become my favorite story in the Bible. As you know from last week, we're talking in this series about 3 stories or images in the Bible, the Old Testament specifically, that help us better understand salvation or the saving work God is doing in the world. These stories help us understand that the Bible's depiction of salvation is far more than salvation from our sins or salvation from hell, as it's often talked about. God is saving us from those things, to be sure, but He is saving us from far, far more. These stories help us understand the extent of God's salvation. The first of these stories is the story of the Exodus, the miraculous liberation of the Israelites from bondage to a system or narrative that was not right or true. We all live in bondage to such systems, narratives, and stories. We are constantly telling ourselves things that are not right or true, and these narratives direct our actions or the course of our lives. The Exodus reminds us that God saves us from these false narratives or systems by reminding us that He is above and beyond them, and that our destiny and hope is rooted securely in Him. Now, the third of these stories is the story of the sacrificial or priestly system found in the Old Testament. We'll talk about this story or image next week, specifically about how this story or image shows us how God saves us from our failures and mistakes. But right in between these 2 stories is the story of the exile, a story which, for me, especially in these middle-aged years, has been incredibly inspiring and hope-producing. So as always, let's start with a little background. Again, the Bible is a collection of 66 different books from antiquity, written by multiple authors over a span of about 1,000 years. The books are arranged into 2 major sections, the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament deals primarily with the nation of Israel from about 1300 BCE to its existence under the Greek Empire around 400 BCE, so about 900 years of history. The New Testament deals primarily with the life of Jesus and the beginning of the church, all of which occur during the 1st century of the Common Era, so about 100 years in the New Testament. The Old Testament, as we saw last week, it sets the stage or the table for the New Testament. Jesus is an Israelite, so the history of Israel found in the Old Testament, it's Jesus' history. What Jesus does and who Jesus is really can only be fully understood against the backdrop of the Old Testament. Understanding the content of the Old Testament, it's really essential for understanding the teachings of the New Testament. Now, the primary way in which the Old Testament sets the stage for the New Testament and establishes the context for Jesus' life, work, and teachings is through these 3 narratives or stories that run virtually through every page of the Old Testament. And again, these 3 narratives are the story of the Exodus, the story of the exile, and the story of sacrifice or the sacrificial system. And again, all 3 of these stories deal at their core with salvation. Salvation from 3 different things. Like the story of the Exodus last week that we looked at, the story of the exile is rooted in historical events. Now, to understand that story, we have to understand the history, which is primarily the history of the nation of Israel. So let's take a little look at how the history of the nation of Israel develops, particularly after the year about 1000 BCE. So in 1000 BCE, or roughly this time period, the nation of Israel becomes a united monarchy under the leadership of King Saul. Saul's monarchy will pass to David. David's monarchy will ultimately pass to his son Solomon. And when Solomon dies, something happens. There's a split in this united monarchy, a split between Solomon's son Rehoboam and the general of his army, Jeroboam. Rehoboam will lead the southern two tribes to form an independent nation that will become the nation of Judah. Jeroboam will take the northern 10 tribes and form what will become or retain the name Israel as a nation. 10 tribes here, 2 tribes here, Israel led by Jeroboam, Judah led by Rehoboam. Here's the important thing to note. By the way, this all happens in the year 931. So roughly 70 years after the monarchy is formed. In 722 BCE, Assyria will conquer the northern nation of Israel, the northern 10 tribes. Those tribes will be deported to Assyria, and they will never exist again. The Assyrians will bring back some people from Assyria into the region occupied by the northern 10 tribes of Israel. Those people will become the Samaritans of the New Testament. But the important thing to know is after 722, the northern kingdom of Israel never exists again. A similar thing begins to happen, or does happen, with the southern kingdom of Judah in 586 BCE when the Babylonians will conquer the southern kingdom of Judah. But unlike what happens with the northern kingdom, beginning in 539 BCE, the people of Judah in captivity in Babylon will be permitted to return to Jerusalem. And many of them will, and they will rebuild the city of Jerusalem, and they'll rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, where for the northern kingdom in 722, their existence ends. The southern kingdom's existence continues on, but this period from 586 to 539 BCE becomes known in Israelite history as the period of the exile, or the period of the Babylonian exile, as it's often referred to. During the exile, during this period of time, which lasts in total about 70 years before the city of Jerusalem is actually rebuilt and the temple restored. During this period of Babylonian exile, the people of Judah will work to maintain their culture, their heritage, and their identity, even though they're living in a foreign land. You might think of the ethnic festivals that are held in our region every summer, preserving the culture, the traditions, the history, and identity of people who came as immigrants to this area. Well, the people of Judah do this type of thing in Babylon. They work to preserve their culture, their identity, and their distinctiveness. But here's the deal. Babylon is not home. And while the Israelites are surviving in Babylon and are not being universally or cruelly oppressed as they had been in Egypt, they're still in a foreign land, away from their homes, their culture, and perhaps most importantly, away from their temple, which had been destroyed in 586 BCE by the Babylonians. The plan that they had for their individual lives, their family lives, and their national life it had been sidetracked or derailed by the Babylonian invasion. Now in 539, as we said, when the Persian Empire defeats the Babylonians, the people of Judah will be permitted to return to their homeland, specifically to Jerusalem. They'll still be subjects of the Persian Empire, but they can finally go home. However, for roughly 47 years, between 586 and 539, these people will be displaced, residents of a foreign land. And for any kid who's ever been homesick during a week of summer camp, you know that 47 years is a long time to be away from home. Now, the story of the exile and God's restoration of his people from exile, it's a story about, as Richard Rohr will put it, it's a story about order, disorder, and reorder. Order, disorder, reorder. That's so important, and terms that you're going to want to remember. Let me write them. Order, disorder, reorder. This is what the exile story is really all about. From roughly the year 1000 to the year 586, life in Israel seemed to be in good order, stable, predictable. Now, it really wasn't, but in exile, looking back at those years, it seemed like this was the time in life when life was good. Now, think about a favorite season in your past. Maybe it's when you were in high school. Maybe it's when your children were young. Maybe it's when you first got your big job or moved into your first house. We often look back on those times nostalgically as the time when life was good, even though in reality it wasn't as good as we've often made it to be in our memory. This is how the Israelites viewed the years from 1000 to 586. It was a time of order, a time when life seemed right, when it seemed good, when things were going in the right direction. Then everything got disrupted. Everything got disordered. The Babylonians attacked Judah. They destroyed Jerusalem. They took the people of Judah captive. Everything fell apart. Again, think in your own life about a time that you felt that way. Maybe your girlfriend broke up with you, or you lost your job, or a health crisis changed your outlook on life. Something fouled up the plan or trajectory that you were on. This is how the people of Judah felt during that 47-year period in exile. But in 539 BCE, it would start to change. The people of Judah, they were permitted to return to Jerusalem. They began to rebuild the city. They rebuilt the temple. By around 516 BC, worship had resumed at the new temple. The exile was officially over, and a new chapter of life had begun. Life was beginning to be reordered. This new chapter would set the immediate context for the life and teaching of Jesus. It's the season and chapter in which the ancient Jewish faith would come to maturity. It in many ways was a better season than what had been before. Again, it was a season of reordering. Now think about that time when you lost your job, but eventually you got a new job, and the new job was even better than the old one. Or that season in your life when you went through a relational breakup. It was so tragic, so disordering. But now, years removed from that pain and disruption, you see that you're now in an even better place than you were before the disordering occurred. Or Think about that college that you applied to get into, that you've been working so hard to be on track to get into, but you didn't get accepted. You had to go to your backup choice. But now 10 years out of college, you're so glad you went to school where you did. Order, disorder, reorder. This pattern repeats itself constantly in our lives. We could illustrate it in 100 different ways. The challenge is, of course, when you're in the disorder stage, when you're in exile, it's hard to see the big picture. You know, we've convinced ourselves that life is always to be up and to the right. We often think about life as a graph, and if we were to draw the graph of what we think life should be, if this is 0 to 100 and this is 0 to 100, we think that life should always move like this. Well, maybe once in a while there's a little bit of a setback, but the general trend of life is this way. Of course, what we all know is that life never works that way. This is what life looks like for most of us. We start out and it goes here, then often it takes a dive here. Sometimes it flatlines here, then sometimes it goes over like this. Then we go here, then we go here, then that's the big drop there. Then we have this, then we circle back around. This is the graph so often of our life. Life is more down, backward, around, more that than it ever is straight forward. But when life goes down instead of up, backward instead of forward, it's easy to think that this is the end. Like life is over, the plan is derailed, the train is off the track. But with God, the train is never off the track. The plan is never derailed. Life is never over. That's what the story of the exile teaches us. God is always reordering our disorder. God will always bring us out of exile. But the story of the exile teaches us something else that's very important. Exile is often needed and necessary. Good things happen in exile. As an interesting side note, the Jewish people likely produced the 5 books of the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, during the exile. Exile, the setback, created the necessary conditions for such important work to be done. Life that's constant up and to the right, it's neither realistic nor healthy. And it's an illusion because no one experiences it, even though we want everyone to think we do. And we don't want to experience this type of constant up into the life anyway, because we often need exile, we need the setbacks, we need the disordering to create the space necessary for God to do new work. Jesus has to be in the tomb for 3 days before the resurrection, the new life occurs. Exile is often necessary, even good, which is why there are all kinds of mini exile stories in the Bible. Moses in Midian, the Israelites in the wilderness, Jeremiah stuck beside the brook, all kinds of mini exile narratives, because exile is often necessary, but exile is also temporary. In God's plan, the disordering doesn't last forever. The kingdom of Judah is restored. The temple is rebuilt. The exiles do return to Jerusalem. Interestingly, this is where much of our sacred Advent or Christmas imagery comes from. The famous lines from Handel's Messiah are taken directly from the book of Isaiah, which reminds the people of Judah that their suffering in exile will end. Listen to these encouraging words from Isaiah chapter 40. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. A voice of one calling in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be raised up, and every mountain and hill be made low, and the rough ground shall become level, the rugged places a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all people will see it together, for the mouth of the Lord has spoken. Good words to commit to memory, especially when you feel in that moment of exile, that moment of disorder. Exile is going to end, and it's going to be even better. Life is going to be even better than it was before. We all experience periods of exile. The tendency is to see these seasons of disorder or setback as failures or as hopeless times from which we'll never emerge. Neither perspective is true. Exile in God's kingdom is neither setback nor failure. It is necessary training ground, condition setting, soil working for new growth, new life, for reorder to occur. And exile in God's kingdom is always temporary. It always ends. We're always saved from, rescued from, or perhaps better we might say, saved through and rescued through our times of exile. It's a country and western song. The songs say it so well. It won't be like this for long. And if you're going through hell, keep on moving. So, if you find yourself in one of those moments when life is no longer up and to the right, or when the plan has been disordered or the train derailed, don't despair. Good things happen in exile. And don't give up hope. Because in God's plan, exile is always temporary. Exile always ends. The disorder is always reordered, which usually helps us see that the original order that was disrupted was not really as good or great as we thought it was anyway.